So this evening, I want to talk a little bit about what it is to live from a Dharma perspective, from a freedom from suffering perspective, from a richness perspective, what it is to live a great life. And I'm going to describe to you a little bit a plot of a book I read recently that I think was very good food for thought. It's a very clever concept to get us thinking about what is it that we seek when we think a life other than the one we're living would make us happier. The book's called The Midnight Library. I actually have a friend who's a librarian who often recommends good books to the group of us that went to school together. And she suggested that this was a book she thought we might enjoy. The premise of the book is fairly simple. The lead character is very disillusioned with her life. It's a pretty bland life. She works at a music store and she doesn't really have any friends. She's estranged from her brother, and she's got her cat and she lives alone. And there's a bit of a crotchety old man who lives next door that she picks up his medications for him once a week. He's trying hard to stay in his house and not be sent to a home. And so she drops off medications. In the course of one day, she loses her job at the music store. She gets home and the crotchety neighbor says, "Oh, I don't need you to pick up my medicine anymore. The new pharmacy will deliver." And she goes in and someone knocks at the door and says, "Do you have a cat? We're very sorry, but it's on the road. We think it's been killed." And they bring in the body of her cat. And she decides she doesn't want to live anymore. There's really nothing to live for. She has no purpose. She has no value. And she takes, it's implied she takes an overdose of pills. And then she wakes up in this library, this mysterious library, with a librarian who you learn through backstory was the school librarian when she was a girl at school, in middle school. And she used to go, because she's a bit of a lonely kid, she'd go to the library. She loved to read. She loved to read National Geographic. She looked at the pictures of other lands and glaciers and the Antarctic and just found it fascinating. And she struck up a friendship with this old lady librarian who encouraged this girl's hopes and dreams and says, you could be anything. You could be anything you ever wanted. You could be a glaciologist. I'm not sure that's a word, but it is in the book. You could study glaciers. You could be anything. And there's a memory that this character has of being a girl and being with this librarian, and the library phone rings and the librarian answers and her face falls and she says, "Oh no, oh no." And you realize it's sort of implied that the phone call was to tell the librarian, presumably someone had phoned the school, the principal had found the librarian, said, "Is this girl there?" And her father had died. So she has that memory. So here she is. And we learn through the course of the book, she's hovering between life and death. She's in a coma back in her apartment, in her bed, in her room. And she's in this midnight library with the librarian from 25 years ago who says to her, "There's an infinite number of books in this library, and there are rows upon rows upon rows, and each of the books is a different shade of green, only green bindings." And the librarian says, "This is the book you must read first." And she pulls a book, she hands it to her, and the book is called The Book of Regrets. The Book of Regrets. And as the character looks in the book, it's things she regrets. She was a competitive swimmer as a girl, the best in her age group at 14 or 15, and then she chose to quit. Her father pushed her very hard to be a swimmer. It was his dream, not hers. And she was an embarrassed adolescent girl being made fun of it, and she quit. So there's the regret. What would have happened if I'd kept swimming? She was in a band with her brother and she left the band. What would have happened if I'd stayed in the band? She doesn't have a partner or children at this phase in her life. What would have happened if I had married the fellow she'd broken up with 3 weeks before their wedding, and so on? And little regrets. I regret not doing more yoga. I regret not laughing more. I regret that I didn't ever get around to painting my bathroom that bright color I thought would look nice, and so on. So, of course, as the listener, as the reader, we're thinking, well, what would be in our book of regrets right now, right? February 2022. What would be in our book of regrets? The paths not taken, decisions we made, mistakes we made, things we were maybe too shy or frightened to plunge into when we had the chance. Being lazier than we think we'd like to be, maybe being a little more unkind the odd time, a little grumpier, big and small, the book of regrets. So then what the librarian goes on to explain is each and every one of the books, of the infinite number of books in this midnight library. It's midnight on the woman's watch. As long as her watch stays frozen at midnight, which it is, she can inhabit each and any parallel lives. It goes into many worlds theory. If you're a bit of a physicist geek, you may know there's a theory, scientific theory, that there are indeed multiple worlds. And right now, each and every one of us is living in an alternate world, or an alternate life of Cheryl Fraser, of Neil Cutler, of Shelley, and so on. So there's the premise of the book. And our character gets to say, well, what would have happened if I'd stayed in the band? And then she picks up that book, the library all shuffles and all these books whiz by and it plops out. And in it, she reads it and then boom, she's inhabiting that life. It's her, but she's like bopped into her, as in this case, the rock star who went on to great fame and fortune and is traveling the world and has to give a concert in Brazil that night and doesn't know half the words because she hasn't actually lived what her parallel person, the parallel Cheryl Fraser, has lived, and so on. In another life, what would have happened if I'd kept swimming? And she goes and she's an Olympic medalist and she pops into that alternate life right before she's meant to go on stage, because she's now a motivational speaker about follow your dreams, conquer your fears, you can do anything. And she's got to be on stage and give this fantastic speech and doesn't know what to say. And then there's perhaps smaller lives. In one of her lives, she's drinking wine with someone and she notices the label of the wine bottle. And it's a happy looking couple with their arms thrown around each other. And there's a little story on the label, as there are in some products, right? Talking about this couple and how they fell in love and their dream was to have a vineyard and make wine. And they've established that. And then one of her alternate lives, she ends up trying that on for size and so on and so on. So what the librarian tells her is when you become dissatisfied, when you become a little bit dissatisfied with this life, you'll pop back into the midnight library. So the premise is that we would keep seeking, right? We would keep seeking for the perfect life. The perfect life. And when we found the perfect life, we'd never pop back to the midnight library again. And we'd stay in that perfect life. And the book goes on and on, all sorts of twists and turns. And she ends up in what feels like a perfect life with a fellow who'd asked her out for coffee once. He was a doctor in the hospital where her mother passed away. He was kind. And he asked her out for coffee. And she said, not right now. And she said, what would have happened if I'd said yes? And so she pops into this life. She wakes up in the middle of the night with him snoozing next to her. And there's about a 4-year-old amazing little girl, actually called Molly. That's her daughter with this fellow. And she falls deeply in love with the little girl and she falls in love with the man. And it's a perfect life. In that life, she's a philosophy professor, one of her great loves, and she's taken a sabbatical to write a book on Henry David Thoreau, one of the writers and philosophers she admires. So it's a perfect life. She's very, very, very happy. She learns to love. She learns what it's like to really let your heart go. But there's a little tiny niche, a little tickle, a little dissatisfaction that it's the perfect life, but it's not really her life because she didn't build all those memories from accepting the coffee to falling in love to having their baby. She plops into it when their child's 4 years old. And at one point she gets pulled out of that life and she's back in the midnight library. And she says, why did I leave? It was the perfect life. I was fully happy. I was fully content. I wasn't dissatisfied. And then a bunch of other stuff happens. I won't spoiler alert it for you in case you want to read the book or listen to it on audiobook. He's a very good narrator. And it's got me thinking, as I hope it's got you thinking. Were you to end up in a midnight library of your own, which is each and every day on this planet, where you were thinking about your regrets, you were thinking about the almost unimaginable amount of decision points that have brought each of us to this moment right now. How many decision points brought each of us to this moment? I think it's the 21st of February, right now, being here on this virtual Dharma call together. All of it, from where we live to however we first found each other in this group, or some of you might be popping on for the first time because you did a random search on meditation in Nanaimo and the website might have come up. But the amazing number of decisions and paths not taken and paths taken yes to and regrets. And how often do we look at our present life and think, I wish it was better than this. I wish I was with another partner. I wish I had a more interesting job. I wish I was 10 pounds skinnier or 10 pounds more muscled. I wish I was a more patient person. I wish I had more friends. I wish my dog would be more obedient. I wish. Now, don't beat yourself up, because of course your mind does that in some form, some of the time. All of our minds do. If only, I wish, I regret, I wonder what if. So it's such a really fascinating concept. And I strongly encourage each and every one of us to play with this idea over the next few days. What would be in your book of regrets? What are things that you regret not doing? Things that maybe money didn't allow you. Maybe you got accepted to a great university or great program and you just couldn't swing it financially, and you had to say no. And what is the mental, emotional, dharmic state we're in when we live wondering if there's something better, right? What if we're an Olympian and a world famous motivational speaker, adored by so many? What if we're a multi-million selling musician who fans come to you and say, your music, your poetry, your lyrics saved my life. When you talked about pain and loss and grief in such a beautiful way in your art, it kept me going. That's a pretty beautiful gift. That's a pretty beautiful offering. What would it be for each of us if we could snap our fingers and be in one of our parallel alternate lives, where you've got an amazing partner and 3 gorgeous kids, or no partner and no kids and absolute peace and quiet, or whatever it would be? And what does it say about our human experience that so often we long for something other than this? It might be really subtle, right? It might be, oh, I long for pizza, but all I've got is yogurt and granola, so that's what I'll have for supper tonight. It doesn't have to be vast, doesn't have to be life-changing. It can be so small. But these are the little lacks, the little wantings, the little desirings, in a Dharma sense, the little clingings or attachments that will pull us out of happiness. They will pull us out of contentment. They will pull us out of being free from suffering. Being free from suffering. Another really notable thing in this novel that I enjoyed is when our heroine pops into an alternate life, when she pops into the life with the lovely guy and the wonderful 4-year-old daughter, and a Labrador called Plato. She, one day after being in that life for a few days, she looks at her husband and says, I am so grateful for you. You're such a fantastic guy. And he kind of looks at her like, oh, why, thank you. That's really nice to hear. And it's such a nice reminder of how rarely we might do that very thing. We do it sometimes when there's a crisis, when we hear a friend's partner's been in a bad car accident, and it wakes us up to the preciousness and the immediacy of life and how easily we could lose that frustrating person we haven't been enjoying lately, but who we love. But it was such a lovely reminder of the beauty of the present moment, the beauty of the mind that is curious, the beauty of the mind that seeks to see what's actually happening, that we're each of us to pop into our own life, this current life, the life that you're bringing to this class, from elsewhere, we'd appreciate it more. We'd appreciate the moments or the beauty of the view or how lovely our frustrating, impossible partner, child, cat, dog, friend, roommate, neighbor is, by simply showing up in the present moment to appreciate what is. And it's impossible to appreciate what is if we're hanging on to what might be, or what we wish could be, or what we blew it by not recognizing at the time. And it seems to be the nature of the human mind, certainly this human mind at times, I suspect all of yours, to spend far too much time thinking about things other than what is, longing for things other than what is, believing we'd be happier if only. If only we were an Olympian, a rock star, in love, had a great kid, healthier. We certainly like to be healthier if we're not. We'd certainly like to be pain-free if we struggle with pain. We'd certainly like to have more money if money creates worries in our life, in our family. But how much of your life do you spend either explicitly or without even realizing it, kind of wishing you were an alternate version of this life. It might be a very similar life that if they were put side by side, no one but you would notice the difference, but there'd just be little bits that would be better or different or easier, right? So I loved the book because it got me thinking about those things, applying that to my own journey and thinking, what if? And the book goes on because it's a clever and intelligent, in my biased view, writer. He goes on to help the character discover what you might have already guessed, which is the perfect life is the one you're in and inhabiting, where you're saying yes, where you're trying things that may or may not work out, where you're living with more grace and more compassion and more kindness and more courage. Through some of her alternate lives she visits, some of them are in the same town, but she's in a different role. She's maybe dated a different person or working at a different job or et cetera. She's always the same age and looks the same except for differences in maybe haircut and how fit she is. But in one of the lives she visits, she goes to an old age home trying to find the old version, meaning the elderly version of the librarian that she knew 25 odd years ago when she was in school. And instead, what she finds at the old age home is a man who seems familiar, a grumpy man who seems familiar. And you may guess if you've been paying attention. She finds the grumpy neighbor that in her life, right before she attempted to take her own life, he was the fellow she used to get the medications for. And he said, I don't need you to get them anymore because the new pharmacy delivers. But in the alternate timeline, the alternate life, it becomes clear that he was unable to get the help he needed to get his meds and his food delivered. And he was therefore forced by his son to go into care. And she realizes for the first time, quite a bit like that very popular movie, It's a Wonderful Life with George Bailey, they play at Christmas time, where he gets to see through the angel's eyes the impact he's had on people and where people would end up if he wasn't alive. And so she realizes her being alive, even in her most depressed state, so miserable, lonely, feeling like life is futile, the simple kindness of picking up that fellow's medication in her timeline kept him from being put in an old age home. She also sees the police officers in one of her alternate lives she visits, arresting three kind of thuggish teenage boys. And she recognizes one of them and realizes in her actual life, the one she's suiciding out of, that this young boy was her one and only piano student, and he had a real talent and he really enjoyed music and he was having trouble at home and at school. That's why his mom reached out to help him pursue music. And she realizes when she wasn't his teacher, if she took an alternate life, that he ends up on the streets and with the wrong crowd and committing crimes. And she starts to see, as we all would see if we had a It's a Wonderful Life moment, if we had a Clarence Angel come and show us, what would the world be like if Neil hadn't walked through it the way he's walked through it so far? What would the world be like if Marie hadn't walked through it the way she's walked through it so far? Whose life would be profoundly different if we hadn't walked through life the way each of us has so far? That doesn't mean we've done a sterling job. I sure haven't. I've made all sorts of mistakes and wrong turns that would be in my book of regrets. But what would be different if I hadn't maybe made those mistakes? Who did my mistakes maybe positively benefit simply by maybe learning from what I did wrong? It's a really interesting meditation on why the hell aren't we more content with the life we have? Why, even if our life is hard right now, even if we've got really tough emotional struggles, really tough financial struggles, maybe our family's being torn apart by greed and rancor and anger and old patterning or fighting over a will or something. Maybe we've got a beloved who's ill and going to die before their time, earlier than we'd hoped, and so on. Maybe we're filled with rage. Maybe we're struggling with physical or mental health challenges that are really painful. I'm not denying or dismissing or minimizing any of that. But this is the life we have, February 21st, 2022. This is it. As of this moment, this is it. Can we change it? Absolutely. Can we alter the course of it? You betcha. Almost an infinite number of books in our library of what we could do now in this life. We could quit our job tomorrow, sell our house, move to a small farm somewhere, and meditate and raise money for charity. We do almost anything. And what is it to circle back round, as the character does, to the life she's in and decide it's worth fighting for, that I don't want to die. It's not as despairing as I felt, that I can handle the despair when I realize I have a choice to shift the trajectory from this point forward. Is it going to be easy? No. Is it going to be simple and quick and like snap of a finger, pick up the right book and you've got the perfect life? No, because of course, in all the lives she visits, dozens, hundreds of them, none of them are perfect. A lot of them didn't turn out the way she fantasized they would. So when we find ourselves fantasizing about the other life with the other spouse, or if only I'd gone to university instead of working right out of school, or whatever it was, there's always the implied belief that it would be better than this. Generally, I don't think most of us waste much time fantasizing about lives that are crappier than this, right? We don't spend a lot of time going, oh, if only I'd done this, I'd be way less happy and I would hate everything. No, it's always, oh, I'd probably be happier. I regret not doing that. In that regret is the hook. In that regret is the suffering. In that regret is the illusory belief that that would be better, when actually nothing's better than whatever's happening right now, if we can show up and embody it. Even if we're in the middle of something really awful, we're in a hospital bed being treated for cancer right now. If we can fully show up in this moment, and for a moment, let go of our stories, our fears, for a moment, coexist with any physical pain, hold it with grace, hold it with compassion, hold it with spaciousness. In this moment, for that moment, everything's okay. Everything's okay. And look, certainly I can say, and it's not something I'm delighted about, how much time have I wasted daydreaming about other lives in whatever small or big way? Oh, it'll be so fun this weekend. Well, yeah, but if it's Wednesday and you're daydreaming about the weekend excessively, you're missing Wednesday, right? Oh, I can't wait to do this. That's not a bad thing. You shouldn't cease and desist future planning or enjoying thinking about things. But how much of our lives do we waste thinking about something other than this, being somewhere other than this? How much time in our meditation are we somewhere other than this? Usually a fair bit, where we're in thought or planning. Might be as benign as, things we need to pick up at the hardware store tomorrow. It's not necessarily big, profound, or ugly, or scary, or overriding thoughts, just thoughts. But we're not at the hardware store when we're meditating. We're wherever we're meditating. And when we're lost in making a list, perhaps a positive list to do some positive things at home with the things you're going to buy at the hardware store, but we're missing life. We're not living this life here and now. By definition, when we're not present, we're not living. We're alive, but we're not living. Think about that. When we're not present, we're not at least fully living. We're phoning it in, so to speak, or skating through. I had a patient quite a few years ago. She was a youngish mom. She was about 28 or so, had two beautiful girls, I think about 3 and 5. And this particular young woman suffered from very bad anxiety at times, and felt very driven, and she'd be home and always planning and organizing and cleaning and thinking ahead and having lists. Nothing particularly bad about that. A lot of us have some of those tendencies for sure. But here's the point of the story I want to share. She was going on a small vacation with her husband and the 2 kids, and I think maybe the in-laws, and they needed to fly out of Victoria to somewhere in California, I think. And she, in addition to her regular anxiety, this particular person also had quite a high, almost phobic level fear of flying. She knew it was irrational. She knew that jets were pretty safe. She couldn't help it. She got very, very anxious and worked up if she had to get on an airplane. So in consultation with me and with her physician, it was deemed wise for her at that time to get some anti-anxiety medication that she could take the day of her flying to calm that anxiety, make it more tolerable for her to get on the airplane and fly for a few hours. It was a wise choice and a judicious choice. So she did that. Week or so later, she gets home from the trip. We're having a meeting and she says, you know, Cheryl, something really interesting happened on the airplane. So she had taken anti-anxiety medication, which took a lot of the fear out of her system, took a lot of the physiology of anxiety out of her system. And what it did was it sort of tricked her into being far more present. And the story she told me was this. She said, I'll call her little girl Jennifer, make up a name here. And she said, you know, I was on the airplane and her daughters were about 3 and 5. As I said, they were pretty small. And she said, so I was sitting on the plane and Jennifer wanted to play some sort of game with me. And she said, so I was, you know, we were sitting in our airplane seats and I played this game with her. And then my patient started to cry and I was not quite sure why she was crying. And she said, you know, Cheryl, it was the first time I've ever just played with Jennifer. I've been there just playing with Jennifer, not playing with her, like phoning it in, just surface, like doing the game with her while I'm thinking and worrying and rushing and wanting to be somewhere else, getting on to the next thing. I was just playing with her and it was amazing. And it was so easy. And the reason I'm crying is I had no idea I could feel like that. So through a strange little circle of taking medication for airplane anxiety, that gave her an experience of just being with her child, not thinking about something else, rushing ahead, being in an alternate life almost, right? Well, when we get to the airport, we'll have to do this and that and the other. Yeah, I'll move the pieces around. I'll give lip service to the game, but I'm only 30% here. She was closer to entirely there. And she wept because it was a major revelation to her of what it feels like to just simply be present for a short period of time, to actually play a game with your little girl, to actually experience it, to enjoy it, to connect with her, to settle enough to be here now. So to a fairly large degree, this is why, maybe you may not know it, but this is why some of us meditate, amongst other helpful and wholesome reasons, is to help remind the mind how to show up here and now. Now, in a 30-minute meditation, you might experience being here and now for a minute and a half and not all in a row. That's fine. You're practicing the experience of just playing a game with Jennifer, nothing else, fully engaged in this here and now. That's where all the bells and whistles of life light up. That's the golden ticket. That's the perfect life that the character in this book is seeking in the Midnight Library. That's happiness. That's freedom from suffering, is fully experiencing what's happening as it is here and now, not wanting something else, not wanting something better, not comparing it, and not thinking, if only I also had a latte. Me, Jennifer, the game, the present moment, and a latte. That would be even better. I'm not saying it wouldn't be nice, but it's just this, just now, just me, just the moment. That's the perfect life. And the perfect life, in the thesis I'm setting out tonight anyway, can only be lived a moment at a time. Because if you've planned the perfect vacation next week, you know where this is going, right? If you plan the perfect dinner party tomorrow, if you've planned the perfect day off, those may or may not come to pass at all. Hopefully they will. And they may or may not live up to your expectations. They won't fully and completely. But you're living for the perfect vacation next week, or the perfect dinner party tomorrow, or. And again, planning is beautiful, wholesome planning, etc. No problem. But I guess what I'm saying is, for more happiness and less suffering, shrink it down to size. Enjoy your planning, but then let it go for a bit and come back to now. Plan a little more later. Come back to now. The profound perfection of a perfect life is lived in each moment you simply play the game with Jennifer, or you simply throw the ball for the dog, or you simply drink a cup of tea, and you enjoy the hell out of it. You enjoy the hell out of what is, because no kidding, it's so logical, but we often don't live in alignment with it. That's what you've got. It's so obvious. What do we have? What we've got. What do we want? Something other than what we've got. And then we suffer. That's the first and second noble truth of Buddha Dharma. So Dharma comes in many forms, right? It comes in playing a game with Jennifer on an airplane. It comes in a book that my librarian friend, who may have a predilection for books with the word library in it, let's be honest, suggested to girlfriends that we've all known each other since the 7th grade. Oh, you guys might like this book. It's pretty good. And I'm like, great, I'll download it. I like to listen to books when I hike sometimes. And I thought, that's a really interesting Dharma book. Why live this life if we could hop sideways to infinite other lives? Now, full disclosure, if I ended up in a midnight library and I had the opportunity to be a tourist in alternate multiple Cheryl lives, I'd want to check some of them out. I'm a curious person. But I wouldn't be checking them out because I believed one of them is better. But it'd be pretty cool to, drop into a few lives and see what they were like, and then come back to this one. Even if some of those other lives I had more luxury and more fun and maybe even richer social connections or whatever, that'd be great. But if anything, all it could really do would be inform each and every one of us. I really miss music. So come back to your present real life and get out the yellow pages, well, whatever digital version we use now, and find a music teacher. Now, in this life, instead of longing for the life where you didn't give up piano when you were 9 years old. And if you'd kept practicing piano between 9 and 57, you'd probably be really good at it. But guess what? You could start piano tomorrow and you won't be really good at it, but you can bring piano, you can bring music back into your life. There's the metaphor. Bring music back into your life here and now instead of longing for a life where you have music. So what does it come down to? Buddha Dharma, as my root teacher Namgyal Rinpoche was fond of saying, it's about suffering and the cessation of suffering. If it's not about suffering and the cessation of suffering, it's not Dharma. So it comes back to that over and over. Why would we meditate? Well, don't do it if it's going to make us suffer more. That doesn't mean that you won't suffer while you meditate. God knows you probably will some of the time with back pain, mental pain, frustration. But overall, meditation, contemplating the nature of mind, thinking about our life in the way I'm presenting it tonight, if this feels skillful at all to you, will help us suffer less, will help us have a bigger picture, that open awareness where things don't need to stick as much and say, boy, I'm having a terrible day. Are you? Was every moment of today terrible? Probably you had a nice bite of food in there that tasted yummy at some point, or maybe your grandchild phoned and asked how you were doing, and you had a 5-minute conversation that lit you up a bit. Every second, every millisecond of a day isn't bad. Even when it feels like it was a really rough day, even when it was a really painful day, there are moments of grace, moments of happiness, or moments of neutrality mixed in there. What are we going to focus on? The take-home message is simple, and it's hard to do, at least for this being. Stop living as though the good stuff's going to be later. Stop living as though once you get X, it'll work out. Start living more now in this moment. And when you forget, I forget too, show up and begin again. What can we do in this life, this reality now, even if there's multiple other Neils and Cheryls and Shelleys and everybody else living lives, some of them more glamorous and some of them more easy. This is the one we've got. What a great call to action that is. This is the life we've got. What are we going to do with it? Leave the midnight library, enjoy spying on some of our lives, and come back to the one we've got, and maybe use our regrets to inform us of things we'd like to shift a little bit. Use our regrets to help us make different choices. Oh, I regret that I didn't spend more time with family. Great. Guess what we can do now? Spend more time with family. those that are still on the planet. Oh, I regret I kept meaning to do a longer meditation retreat. Great. Schedule one now in the next few months. Do what you can. It's so empowering. It's so fantastic to realize it's never too late until we draw our last breath. After that, I'm not quite sure what happens. We might get to come back and try it again, but I'm going to work with what I know we've got for now, which is this one. Quite simply, what skillful changes would you like to make in the life you're living? Maybe they're going to be super small. You're going to drink more water. You're going to watch a little less TV and read a little more inspiring poetry, or even a good novel that makes you think about what you regret, what you might have done differently. But realize if we'd done anything differently, none of us would be here now in whatever incarnation we're having tonight. And that we can always begin again. We can have infinite and will have infinite new lives from this moment forward. So ultimately, yes, circumstances occur that affect us, sometimes tragically and brutally, but ultimately it's our life. It's our book. And we've got an open book in front of us and a really nice pen that writes in your favorite colored ink. And we can write our next moment. We can choose our next moment. Instead of feeling as though there's some great author in the sky who's deciding what our day is going to be like today. It's up to us. So that, I think, is what I had to say this evening. Yep. We get to decide, and it's not easy, and don't beat yourself up if you trip and fall. Don't beat yourself up when you forget that it ultimately begins and ends with you. Happiness, unhappiness. Yes, many things affect us, but ultimately it's how our mind processes and reacts to, works with and dances with the circumstances we find ourselves in, or we've created, or we brought amongst ourselves, or all of the incarnations. What do we do right now in this moment with this breath, with this moment of being alive? If a meteor hits the earth tonight, we're all wiped out in an instant, in a painless instant. How do you want your last few hours to be? It's entirely up to you. Isn't that marvelous? It can feel overwhelming, but it's also marvelous. And sometimes it's just as simple as simply playing a game with Jennifer and being present as you play. So on that note, we'll sit together for 2 or 3 minutes. I'll ring the bell. We'll make a few small announcements, and then we'll dedicate the merit. And just before I dedicate the merit, I'd like to thank you all for your kind attention. Thank you to Neil and the rest of the team, Neil for organizing the tech tonight and keeping us connected in this way. I myself am leaving on meditation retreat for a month in about a week over on Galliano. So we won't have any classes till April, but we should be able to have a couple of classes in April, hopefully in person in Nanaimo at the Rotary Center. And we'll be announcing those soon. We'll choose those dates in the next week or so you can have them on your docket for April. And with Neil's kind help, we'll probably also be able to stream those live classes for those of you that can't attend in Nanaimo in person. There's also some talk of offering another meditation retreat at Bethlehem Center maybe this spring. So I'll talk to the committee about that, and we'll see if that might also be something we're able to do. So thank you so much for this evening, and we'll end in the traditional way, which is to dedicate the merit. And if you're new to this practice, again, we practice not just for ourselves, although that's a fine motivation to begin. But as our hearts become more open and more relaxed, as we see the bigger picture, we're also moved to practice on behalf of other people, those we love, our family, our friends, people we see suffering, strangers we see suffering, sentient beings. So dedicating the merit is like we gather all the good thoughts, the good intentions, all the good mojo, and we share it not just for ourselves, but for each of you here and for all beings. There's many traditional and less formal ways to do that. But for today, by the merit of this strengthening activity of sharing some meditation and some thoughts about well-lived lives in the present moment and Dharma, may there be a cessation of suffering, a cessation of greed and longing, a cessation of half living our present life because we're longing for something better. May we be wiser, may we be kinder, may we be more happier for the benefit of all beings. Thank you for your kind attention. Stay tuned for a newsletter in the next week or 10 days before I head off, where we'll again announce a couple of dates to meet together in April. Lovely to see some of you. Lovely to know more of you are watching on the other stream and later. And for now, live this life as best I know, unless you have extra physics abilities, is the one we've got for sure. Bye for now.